All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. We're thrilled today to have Peter Yo, President of the Better World Campaign and Senior Vice President of the United Nations Foundation. So before we get started, let me have everybody introduce themselves. And to kick things off, my name is Connor Cleveland. I'm a third-year student at the University of Texas at Austin. And the last time I traveled with EF was actually at the Japan Experience Tour. But the time that I traveled with them at the inauguration 4 years ago was probably my most favorite trip that I've taken. And I would say something that really stood out to me and something that really kind of stuck with me this whole time is that the Women's March that occurred that day is something that just really opened my mind to like really like social awareness and social like activity, and just seeing that many people in an event for one thing really just kind of like just opened my mind to what's possible in this environment. So I want to also prompt the other interviewees to to introduce themselves as well. Riley, go ahead.
Riley Stewart. I'm a senior at Civic University, and I also traveled 4 years ago to the inauguration through EF tours. And my favorite memory has to be just being in Washington, D.C., traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast, and just like feeling all of the history and or seeing all the history and just experiencing like such a different place than I was used to. And of course, the historic moment. And then to Nick Taha, to you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Nigda Ek. I am currently a first year at Mount St. Mary's University. I am currently a pre-nursing major, and I traveled with EF when I was in 8th grade. That was 5 years ago. And on that trip, that inspired me to have a career in medicine.
All right, well, thank you guys. Now the first question for Peter, could you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your work and the impact between the UN and the relations with the US?
Great, thank you. I'm Peter Yo, and I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and my first trip to Washington, D.C. was for a demonstration when I was in high school, and I was blown away when we arrived at night and I saw the Capitol all lit up at night, and I thought, I wonder if there's someday whether I could work in Washington, and I spent 20 years working on Capitol Hill. At the United Nations Foundation, my job is to make it easier for Americans to communicate with their lawmakers about the investments we make in the United Nations. I mean, why do we send our best diplomats to the UN? Why do we invest financially in the UN? We do it because it's in our interest, from a national security and a foreign policy perspective. So my job is to, help facilitate lobby days, allow for constituents to more easily and smartly call their members of Congress and staff to weigh in about the power of the UN, and to myself go testify before Congress, and to serve as an expert in the media about the United Nations and America's relationship with the UN.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Peter. So now we can pass things over to Nick Taha for the next question.
Thank you, Connor. So, Peter, you are the president of the Better World Campaign. What is the Better World Campaign, and why is it particularly important at this point in time?
Well, it's a great question. The Better World Campaign was set up about 20 years ago to serve as a voice in Washington around the country for a strong American relationship with the UN. For the creation of the Better World Campaign, the United States owed $1 billion in overdue dues to the United Nations. And so we were created to serve as that sort of inside Washington voice that's on Capitol Hill, in congressional offices, with the executive branch, explaining why it's important that we pay our dues to the United Nations. And also, but you can't, just go into an office and say, give us the money, right? Nobody's going to respond to that. You have to go into offices and say, I know that you care about Sudan. Here's the UN's role in Sudan and why it's in our interests. I know you care about humanitarian relief throughout Africa. here's why the UN is on the front lines of humanitarian relief in Africa and why it's important that we invest in the World Food Program. I know you care about terrorism. Did you know that the United Nations plays an important role in creating lists of international terrorists to keep out of our countries? These are the types of conversations that we're having all the time on Capitol Hill. You have to meet people where they are. Even all of you aren't interested in the same issues. Why would you be? And so you have to find out what people are interested in on Capitol Hill and then explain how the United Nations serves that interest. And about 10 years ago, we brought the United Nations Association into our fold. And so we have chapters around the country of citizen activists and student activists that are reaching out to the members of Congress and developing those lifelong relationships that really have the power to change the view of our lawmakers. And it's exciting when it happens.
Great. I have another question. Can you elaborate on how the Better World campaign collaborates with Congress to promote a strong U.S. and UN relationship? And how does the current state of affairs impact the relationship, if at all?
It's a great question. We tend to hire people at the Better World campaign and the United Nations Association that either have worked on Capitol Hill as interns or staff, or have worked a lot with the Hill, because it's like anything else. There's some things you can't teach people about working on the Hill. You have to be there to sort of drink it up. And so it's one of the reasons why my team, was very affected by the, militant invasion of Capitol Hill on January 6th. We all worked there. I mean, I spent 20 years there. I spent many hours on the floor of the House of Representatives, as did all my colleagues. And so for us, it was personal to see the Capitol desecrated in this way, and also to see a constitutional process, which is the certification of our next president, the militants trying to stop that constitutional process. So it's been a trying period for all of us. It's been a trying period for our nation. It's been a real trying period for those of us who worked on Capitol Hill. But this is a challenging time in America's relationship with the United Nations. We currently owe, get this, yet another $1 billion to the UN that has accumulated in the Trump administration. So, we have our work cut out for us to try to convince Congress, convince the Biden administration to make it a priority to meet our financial obligations to the UN, but perhaps even more importantly, make that diplomatic investment in the United Nations to make sure that we're just, really prioritizing our relationship and getting stuff done via the United Nations, and that we're also invested equally in changing and updating the way the UN does its work so that it's the best UN it can be.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I'll pass it to Riley.
Just go into another question. On the topic of experiencing the world and making the world a better place, how does the Better World campaign aim to reach this goal?
Well, we do this in a couple of ways. We believe that the best way to make Americans understand the value of the United Nations and the value of multilateral engagement is to show them firsthand how the UN is affecting and changing lives around the world. So, for instance, we sponsor not the Better World campaign, but our parent organization, the United Nations Foundation, sponsors many trips where we take congressional staff and members of Congress to see the UN at work throughout the world. So I personally lead delegations to Africa, to Mali, Central African Republic, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, Burundi, just to name a few over the last couple of years, Lebanon, because frankly, when you actually see the UN as serving as peacekeepers serving as development professionals, serving as humanitarian professionals, you're blown away because you see what kind of power the UN has in the field and how they work cooperatively with the government. They work cooperatively with the United States and the US Embassy, and they work cooperatively with the people. So travel changes everything. And we have the most cynical people before the trip about the UN. They get on the plane afterwards like, I had no idea the UN was doing all that. I'm like, indeed, how could you know, right? But we also increasingly are doing virtual trips where we, since we can't travel at the moment, so we take people overseas virtually to see the power of the UN. And I think it has a real transformative effect. It certainly did for my life. I mean, the reason I'm in this field is because I traveled. I lived in China as a student. I traveled extensively when I got out of college. It fundamentally changed my life and my career. And so if it did it for me, it could do it for everybody.
Thank you so much for that. Why do you think it's important for people, specifically students, to be civically engaged?
Well, listen, I mean, it's your country, it's your country and it's your future. And, I'm blown away constantly that young people are stepping up and getting engaged in a variety of ways. And I think the most important trap to avoid is that there's only one right way to become engaged civically. I was a political geek. So for me, my civic engagement when starting in elementary school was politics. So I did campaigns. But that's not the only way to get involved. I mean, my kids who are your age, their civic engagement was through supporting nonprofit organizations, through their time here in our nation's capital. And so there's so many different ways to get engaged civically, and it really will ensure that the next generation of leaders who are already coming into power, think of it. We have members of Congress, members of the Senate who are 36, 37, 38 years old, members of the House that are 25, 26, 27. This is you folks. And these people got to positions of power by becoming active in their communities, active in our nation, active in our world. And it's just exciting to see.
Thank you. You talked a lot about how travel can help the councilmen and women to see how the UN affects or how the UN helps other nations. How would you say traveling, or what does traveling do for students and teachers, and what potential they have to learn along the way?
I think that I think the most important thing that traveling can do, both domestic and internationally, is it just takes you out of your comfort zone and forces you to see things from a fundamentally different perspective. So going to an inauguration can make you see all the different people there are in this country that and how different we all are. And we have got to appreciate how different we all are in this country. So if we have any hope of understanding how to knit us together moving forward, because we all live in our own pods. We get social media from similar feeds. We go to schools in which we socialize with people that are roughly like us. And we live in communities where people are roughly like us. And traveling, whether it's to an inauguration, whether it's to another city for an extended period of time, or study abroad, a mission internationally, it really forces you to realize, boy, this is a big country and a big world. And I do not know everything I need to know. I am not the repository of all wisdom about the future of this country. And I've got to think about compromise. I've got to think about change. And I got to think about building bridges. And because if you don't, we are sunk as a country. And, we've got to understand each other's perspectives. And for me, as a high schooler, being involved in politics, I lived in a wealthy suburb. And when I went down and had to do retail politics in Milwaukee, I met a lot of people that I never would have met before. And it fundamentally changed my perspective about how you develop coalitions and how you develop a path forward that is based upon consensus, that is based upon, really trying to find a common ground.
Very nice.
Awesome. I got one last question for you. What is one piece of advice to give to people who might be feeling overwhelmed at the moment? What can people do today to make a difference?
I think the most important thing, a couple of things. First of all, I think you have to take time off from social media and take time off from media, period. I am overwhelmed at times, and I just have to turn it off. And I have to watch reality television, or I have to watch funny YouTube videos, or I have to, the other day I spent half an hour, sun was shining, breathing deeply and listening to spa music just to clear my head. I have got to turn off the 24/7 noise and clear my head, and not, because that is what's causing us in part to feel overwhelmed. We're already feeling overwhelmed because we're living with COVID. We're already feeling overwhelmed because we can't travel as much as we used to. We can't connect with each other in the way that we've connected with friends and family. We're already just maxed out. And so we're more dependent upon computers in a way and media than we have been in the past, which is hard to believe. And we have got to turn it off every once in a while and spend half of the day. The world will keep spinning. We'll be able to get caught up, but we've got to get out of this 24/7 cycle because it is killing us.
Yeah. I would just like to add to that. I totally agree in that how sometimes just seeing things online kind of desensitizes us to a point where we don't realize the impact things are having these days, and we don't realize that this is still a part of history. And I wanted to just add on the fact that when you talked about traveling and getting out of that comfort zone, especially like when I went to the inauguration, I was a part of it and I was actually there in person. And I feel like that has a much longer like impact and lasting impact that I think carries with you than just, scrolling through like social media or seeing it in a textbook even. It doesn't really have like that real rawness and that real like authenticity. And it almost seems fake because some things you see online can be fake. And so you don't always, believe it. And so being there in person, being there, I think is just something that I believe everybody should try to experience in some sort of social social consciousness or social, engagement.
Well, we need to be there online too. I mean, I'm going to be watching the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris inauguration, because it's a historic moment in our country. I was there for the Obama first inauguration when I was one of the people caught in the big purple tunnel of doom, and eventually got out of the tunnel and got to see parts of the inauguration. I've been at other inaugurations. I mean, it's important that we be there, but you're raising an important point, which is that sometimes we have to separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, that's an important moment. These are important moments in history. It happened on January 6th in our country. That was an important moment in history. They're not all the same. So we need to be able to understand what's really important and significant and what is less so.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for being here today. I think that about wraps everything up for this conversation. I think we had a lot of good engagement, a lot of good, back and forth understanding what you do at the UN Foundation and also how you view the world and what kind of advice you gave out today. And I hope that those of you guys watching learned a few things about Peter and about the Better World campaign and UN Foundation, and also how you can be more active in your community. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Peter, and have a good day.